Yeah. Wow. Wow. Monthful Profit. Off top, man. I just want to say a big shout out to everybody. So I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Necrit. Something like that. But man, listen. We gonna kick the series off right. Official timeline of League of Legends. I feel like this is where I should start. But we're here, bro. We gonna kick it off for the part 1 of the series. What's up? Shout out, man. Shout out to this dude.
For a while, you know that this isn't the first time that we are making a timeline for League of Legends. We made the first one before Universe even existed.
Okay.
During these dark times, we had to look for the lore in the client. And in the worst case, we had to snoop around the internet because Riot hid their stories on separate websites. And on top of that, half of the champions didn't even have canon story. Then we made the second timeline. That one was released after the Universe launched. There at least we had the base idea of what the story of League of Legends even is. But because we made that video very close to the release of Universe, most of the stories were not fleshed out. And over the following months, some of the details in the story changed. And suddenly that timeline was full of mistakes. And that's why we are making the third and hopefully the last video on the timeline of League of Legends. That's because today Riot released the Realms of Runeterra book, which is an official summary of the entire story of the world.
Off top, before we get too deep into it, a lot of people say, hey man, this dude reads so we don't have to. And I appreciate that. I really do, because I mean, he puts a lot of time into these videos, and it's really dope that now, because I'm dead ass about to start playing this game. So this is giving me a really good backstory of everything to understand where we got today. Like, a lot of people don't really get it because it's like they've been playing it for a long time, but bro, this is a lot of information. A lot.
Of League of Legends. But more importantly, this book also contains the official timeline of this story. And that is what I'm going to show you today. So no more guessing, no more assumptions. What you are about to hear today is set in stone. And the purpose of this video is to give us a guide for the future. So whenever in the future we will need to know when the historical events happened, this video will help us. So, without further ado, let's have a look at the thing the lore community has been waiting for years.
Okay.
The official timeline of Runeterra.
Alright.
Before we start, it is important to note that just like we say that something happened before Christ, because that is how we mark year 0, on Runeterra the foundation of Noxus is year 0. I will talk about it more when we get to it on the timeline.
Okay.
But just remember that when something happened before the year 0, we say that it happened before Noxus. So let's start with the very beginning. The official timeline doesn't show the very beginning of everything, but we know that something happened because we got proofs in the stories. So, countless eons ago, Runeterra popped into existence. This was probably around the time when Aurelian started spreading stars around the universe. In fact, the earliest point in the story we have is the beginning of time. This was mentioned in the story Twilight of the Gods, when the Ascended Warriors rode on the dragons of Twilight to the beginning of times. This was a form of entertainment to the Ascended. Whenever they wanted, they could just jump on the dragons of Twilight and watch the beginning of everything.
So these are basically, he's like saying that these are like the gods that started this is dope.
Either way, that is the earliest point in the story. With this, obviously, we have the entire story of the Watchers, where the Watchers are these creatures from another realm. And as stars and planets started appearing in our physical reality, the Watchers, which were these creatures sitting in darkness, suddenly saw light in the distance. And because they enjoyed their sleeping in the darkness and they didn't want to be blinded by annoying light, they decided to silence it. That is the reason why the Watchers are trying to consume our world. They were sleeping in the darkness since the beginning of anything. And when Runeterra popped into existence, it was like an annoying shining light to them. So if anything, we are invading the privacy of the Watchers. Anyway, this sets up the very beginning of the planet. But now, let's jump onto the actual history of Runeterra that is written in the book. 9,000 years before Noxus, we have the very first Runeterra.
So I got a question. So when he's explaining these, right, it feels like these are like, as you play the game, is basically everything that's been dropping, I kind of... So all the videos I feel like I did, like all the music and stuff like that, seem like milestones in this game. And like seem like different DLC and stuff like that. Like, is that correct? Like, that's kind of seems like what he's explaining throughout this. It's like you move into different territory, like almost they're building new parts of the game and adding it to it. Is that like what he's essentially getting at? That's what I want to know.
Terran story. This era is known as simply the First Lands, which of course is an ancient name for Ionia, so it's not surprising to know where this story takes place. This era is entirely new to us, so pay attention. The description in the book reads, across the island continent known as Ionia, a great war raged between mortals and a race of sky giants. Only by the intervention of the Vastaya Shirei, legendary beings of immense power, existing in both material and spirit realms simultaneously, was victory eventually won. This is interesting because we have never heard about the sky giants before, although they were teased almost years before this book.
Okay.
If you have a look at Universe, you may notice these images with giant swords that have no meaning. Well, they have no meaning because people forgot where these giant swords came from. And the book actually has a special description for this exact
And see, it's crazy to me that you can break this down to a timeline, because I noticed, like, in the first video I did of his, I mean, he was literally noticing different details of the sword. So all this stuff has meaning. And that's crazy. Like, it's crazy how much, like, how deep this really goes. The reason why I kind of wanted to watch this, right, was because I always talk about when I do my reactions to, like, the cinematics or the music, that I feel like I kind of wish that it would be like a show. And I know that we're getting, you know what I mean, a show and stuff like that. But this is like really you understanding everything. Like, it's really deep. Like, to see that every single thing has different meaning, and that's like throughout a timeline of a game, that's some wild ish. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, this game is free. And like, people pay hundreds and thousands of dollars for games that don't have this much stuff.
This is what it says. Titans of the past. It is certain Ionia has much longer and richer history than any living soul could claim to know. Indeed, in the more remote and mountainous highlands, the landscape is still littered with evidence of great wars from ages past. But instead of clearing the ruins, the Ionians chose to respect what remains, even if they no longer fully understand what it represents.
Okay.
So this is a proof that the very first Runeterra story was a war with the giants, which is a war we unfortunately know nothing about.
Okay.
One thing to note is that even for TFT, Riot is using these giant swords for the Ionian maps, so it is clear that Riot might have future plans for this story. But now, let's move on. 8,000 years before Noxus, the War of the Three Sisters. The description of this event tries to set everything on the right track, because previously the story of Freljord had some plot holes. This is what the description says. After they defeated the old gods of the north, a feud developed between the sisters Avarosa, Cyrilda and Lysandra, and quickly escalated into open conflict. The final battle was fought at the gates of Lysandra's citadel, where she sacrificed many allies to entomb her enemies in true ice. This suggests that the Watchers got frozen in the Holding Abyss first, and a couple of years after that, the sisters turned against each other. It wasn't a massive battle that included all three sisters and the Watchers on top of that, like we previously saw. In reality, according to the book, it was two separate battles.
Is that the girl from, I forgot which one it was, but when she was in with the wolf, she was carrying like a wolf on her thing, and then she was overlooking the city it was burning? I think so, because that's the weapon that she had, but I might be wrong.
Despite the fact that Lysandra's bio still mentions everyone being frozen in one battle.
Okay.
But then again, the story has these plot holes only in Lysandra's version of the story. And that might be happening because Lysandra is trying to hide the truth. Originally, with this information, I wanted to retell the entire Freljordian story as accurately as possible. But it is obvious that Riot has the freedom to tell us more about the Watchers in the future. And with Lysandra being a massive liar, if in the future Riot expanded the story and altered the timeline, it would invalidate this entire video. So instead, just remember that the official timeline mentioned that the sisters defeated the Watchers before they got into conflict. But now, let's move on.
Okay.
6,000 years before Noxus, a westward migration. Of course, we know this story very well.
You know what? Part 1. Part 2 coming soon. I promise. Listen. Don't be mad because it's like 24 minutes, so break it into two. I'll do the last one longer. Tune in. Like, comment, subscribe. Grr, bow.